Okay, so as I just covered, my name's Adam Brock, and I'm going to be giving a talk called There Is No Org Chart, and it's going to be about how I run a software startup with AI agents and 0 employees. And I'm the founder and junior vice president of Hypermatic. So this talk is going to be pretty simple. I'm just going to be talking about 3 things. The first is how I designed my company for leverage. Secondly, I'm going to make the case that Codex is all you need. And we're going to finish up by talking about the 1993 major motion picture, Jurassic Park. So I'm just going to start with a quote from my former boss who lovingly told me that, you remind me of myself when I was your age. You're very unemployable. And one of the reasons for this is that I'm basically allergic to bureaucracy. So my contempt for useless meetings and fake work is almost infinite. And so I used to do these things at my previous company, like create these little apps. This one was called Death by Meeting. And you could put in the number of people at the meeting and their average hourly rate. And then you would watch this screen in real time during the meeting to see how much money and time you're all collectively wasting. It also gives you some suggestions at the bottom of other things you could be doing instead of being in this super important meeting. But I knew that I always wanted to start a business. And so after 10 years in digital and advertising agencies, I resigned from my job in 2019. And I did that the week that Figma announced Figma plugins. So that was sort of the impetus for wanting to start my own thing. I thought I could start a company doing that with absolutely no way of proving that it would work. And so now I run a profitable self-funded software startup and I run it by myself. And those 3 things are illegal in Silicon Valley. And so it's sort of a weird startup in a way because at the time this was very peak bubble 2020, 2021 and all these investors were telling me all the things I should be doing. And I just said, you're wrong. This obviously is a really dumb way of running a business. And so I think, I'm kind of happy with where things have landed because it's always all kind of come full circle with these AI tools. So the startup is called Hypermatic, and you can find it at hypermatic.com, or the quickest way is actually just to Google Agile is for losers and hit I'm feeling lucky, and it'll just pop right up. So the company makes commercial Figma plugins, and it's essentially a suite of 12 different Figma plugins specifically focused around automating digital marketing tasks. And that involves design, code, content automation. So you can think about things like animated banners, HTML marketing emails, file conversions, the typical sort of digital agency stuff that you'd be running into. So it's grown to about 2 million users in the last 7 years. And a lot of the customers that we have, or I have, I should say, if I say we, just assume I mean I, or me and my agents, it's one or the other. But in any case, the plugins are used by a lot of world-class companies. So I feel very lucky that these companies have been sort of tricked into thinking there's this massive company behind the products they're using. But at the end of the day, it's just kind of me. So I kind of took the YC Paul Graham advice a little bit too far, where they said do things that don't scale. I just thought that meant forever. And so I've been working on this business every day for the last 7 years on my own, and I've never hired anyone. So you might call that retard maxing, or you might call it, just kind of the way things are going to go in the future. So maybe I was just sort of early. But in any case, I thought if I was going to go to the trouble of starting a company, I should probably design a business that I actually want to work in. So as I said, the company's a bit weird because it doesn't have any employees, it doesn't have any investors, it doesn't have any meetings, everything's done by email. There's no agile TM at all. There's also no enterprise, so everything is just completely self-serve. And therefore, there's essentially no compromise. That's not to say there aren't trade-offs. I think I've certainly turned down multiple 6 figures in potential revenue from doing enterprise deals, but I basically just tell them to go away because I don't want to do the things that they want me to do. And so this was already the foundation that I had for my business for many years before AI kind of came onto the scene. And the reason that I mention this is because you can't kind of put lipstick on a pig, and in the sense that AI cannot fix a broken company. So if your company's idea of workflow optimization is scheduling more recurring meetings until nobody has any time to do any actual work, then AI is not going to save you, I'm sorry to say. It can really only multiply the existing foundation, systems, culture, and values that are already there. So one example of those values for me from day one has always been I wanted to offer extreme customer service. And I won't go into too many details, but if you just picture Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Terminator, it's basically just that, but for every customer support request that I get. I will just stop at nothing until it is resolved as quickly and as effectively as possible, even if that means being looped into third-party providers that have nothing to do with me, like Salesforce or other horrible companies. And so you can think about this as having a foundation for allowing you to add AI as leverage. And so in my case, customer support now becomes a full deployment pipeline. So essentially that means before you might be able to say, when something will be done. But now you can just reply, and the first reply you send to their request is that it's deployed and completed. And so this leads me all to say that I have not written code in 12 months, since July of 2025, when I started using Claude Code in the terminal. And I've basically been saying this for a year to everybody that I know, all my developer friends, all my designer friends, all my business owner friends, shaking random people in the street, telling them about not writing code anymore. But as this line from the Fountainhead kind of makes very clear, the hardest thing to explain is actually the glaringly evident, which everybody else has decided not to see. And so as of today, 100% of my code is written by AI agents. And you're probably thinking, well, how could he possibly know that? And the reason is that I deleted my code editor in March of 2026, about 4 months ago. And I decided to go all in on forcing myself just to use the Codex app. I became so convinced that this was clearly going to be the future that I wanted to force myself to get used to it and embrace it instead of doing things the way that I was doing them before. So to relate it to the Meetup, I think that AI ops, to me, kind of means turning your processes into reliable AI agent workflows. And you can do that by giving your agents the tools, context, rules, taste, judgment, and feedback loops that they need to succeed. And this isn't going to be a super technical talk because my setup is actually intentionally very simple. I love reading about all the new stuff on X and online, and I love kind of paying attention to that, but I personally don't chase every new trick. I just assume that all the most useful breakthroughs will eventually show up in the app, like Codex, for example. And so apologies to anyone who's already kind of familiar with these fundamentals, but I know a lot of people aren't. So there's a few ways you can provide codex and extra details to your agents to make them successful. So the obvious one would be having an agents.md file, which is essentially a dedicated README file to tell your agents exactly how your project works. So everything from how it's structured, where things go, how the deployment works, all this kind of stuff. And you can get Codex or Claude to write this for you, and then you can add to it over time. A newer one is the design.md file. So this is something that's come out of Google as kind of a spec. And it's to help you create a persistent visual identity and design system context for your coding agents. So they should be able to get a sense of what your brand is, what your style is, what components you use, what the visual language looks like. And this can be helpful when you're designing new features rather than just kind of guessing or using the defaults that a lot of these models come with inherently. And another really important one is repeatability. And one way you can do this is by using skills. So it's worth noting that these MD files are just text files. They're just explaining a series of workflows or a series of steps that can be executed by the agent. And you can just create these skills just like you would create them for your employees. So when you hire a new employee, you obviously need to teach them certain things about the business for them to be successful, and agents are no different. So you can go from Keanu on the left, you can teach him skills, and then you get Neo on the right, and he's actually effective. And so as I said, Codex or Claude can create these skills for you. And one way to kind of think about it is if you do something more than twice, you might want to consider turning it into a skill. And you can share these skills with your team. You can share them with people outside of your team. There's about 1 million of them online, so you can look at other people's skills and grab those as well. But essentially, this graph from Anthropic is one way of putting it, where you can think of skills as a concrete step towards continuous learning. So on day one, you've got this AI agent that's really intelligent, but it doesn't really know much about your specific workflows. And you would imagine that over time, as it gets more and more used to how you do things, becomes much more useful. Another important thing is to be able to give your agents tools. So your agent's kind of useless if it's just stuck in the terminal or stuck writing code. You need to give it access to tools in the same way that you give access to your employees' tools. So you want to be able to give it access to the browser, your email, GitHub, Slack, Figma, documents, and you want to let it be able to use your entire computer as well. So if there's not an API for certain tasks, Codex in this case will just take over your cursor and just start doing stuff. And the first time you try that, you really do kind of have a bit of a feel the AGI moment. And Codex makes this quite easy because they have a plugins area where you can just kind of install these skills or integrations with one click. And so yeah, I definitely recommend doing that. And finally, another feature that I find really useful is automations. So Codex has automations built in, which allows you to put your work on Copilot, or Autopilot, I should say. So you can essentially tell Codex what you want to do and when you want to do it. So you can imagine some tasks like, hey, every morning at 9 o'clock, go through my entire email and draft a reply to everything. Summarize my Slack at the end of every day. On Friday afternoons every week, I want you to go through all of my analytics and create me a report or something. The possibilities are infinite. So I want to make the case, and this is obviously going to be controversial with the Claude people in the audience. Actually, a quick show of hands. Who uses Claude? Okay, wow. And now Codex? Okay, not too bad, but definitely like 3/4 Claude. So I'll caveat this with saying you can substitute Codex with Claude Code, obviously. All of these things still apply. But essentially, for me, in my business, I found that just simplifying it and having Codex as the place for everything, I found that Codex is all that I need. So again, as I said, I really love all the optimization going on kind of at the frontier, with multi-agent orchestration, all this kind of crazy stuff. But day to day, I just want to run my business. So I'm spending more time just doing that. So I'm going to show you some examples of how I personally use Codex to run my business for, like $200 a month. And again, this is for my business, so it might not apply to you, but my hope is that you come away with like 1 or 2 ideas that maybe you can use in your own business. So the first thing to note is that Codex is actually a pretty misleading name because as we learned from Donald J. Trump, everything's computer. And so you shouldn't really think of it as just an AI tool for coding. It is really a general purpose AI agent for any work that can be done on a computer. So almost anything you can think of that you do on a computer, whether that's done with code, tools, browsers, or files, Codex is theoretically able to do that work for you. So I would just try and get you to reframe Codex as more of a general agent. And I'm going to do the obvious one first, which is engineering, because that's what I've spent most of my time doing for the last 7 years. And so, of course, automating this is a huge gain in and of itself. So I would estimate there's roughly a 30x increase in the speed of producing code. So roughly a 97% reduction in code delivery time. And one of the reasons for that is that you can run these parallel agents. So you don't just have one agent, you can have many agents all working on different tasks or all working together on the same task. And there are newer sort of workflows that this is all kind of converging on, where you have a main agent essentially orchestrating other sub-agents that are working as teammates, where they pick off tasks in your list and they collaborate with each other and kind of work on the tasks as you would with a regular team. So this is sort of the direction that a lot of this stuff's going in. So other boring stuff that it's been really helpful for is things like platform migrations and infrastructure optimizations. So Codex essentially paid for itself in the first day that I tried doing this stuff. The provider for my documentation platform 10x'd their prices overnight, and I decided I'm just going to migrate to VBRES in this case. And it did the entire migration in 1 day because I owned all the markdown stuff, and it's worked really well. And it's also been really good for optimizing other services as well. So going through log files and finding things that are using resources or things like that, it's been really great for. One of the other most important things that I use Codex for on a day-to-day basis is bug fixes and feature requests. So I have a skill that effectively goes through my customer emails, reads the email, investigates what the issue or request is. It'll write any code for it. It'll review its own work, automatically update the public documentation, and then tell me it's done, and it will tell me it's done with a draft of the email reply to send to the customer. And as I mentioned, there's a skill that it knows that anytime it makes any product updates, it will automatically update an internal changelog. So it tells me what it's done and why. And it also updates the public doc site. So the doc site publicly and the products are always in sync. There's never a question of them sort of being out of sync anymore. And this also gets indexed with AI lookups as well. So anytime it updates the documentation, that gets incorporated in the AI-generated answers on the doc site as well. The other really important one is customer support emails. And so this is another individual skill that I have, which can be called by the other workflow that I mentioned. So when it comes time to draft the email, it looks up this skill automatically. It knows that if we're doing emails, it should use this email draft skill. And essentially, Codex has complete access to my business Gmail. It's been trained to use my exact voice. It knows how to verify facts, and it always gives me a draft to send and will never send it without my permission. It's also really helpful for customer admin and billing, and it's useful in this way. Again, I've given Codex complete access to my payment platform, so it can automatically look up invoices, customer emails, accounts, all that sort of stuff. And again, it won't do anything destructive until I tell it to. Things like cancelling subscriptions and stuff like that. And this one makes me really happy because as Agent Smith once said, you should never send a human to do a machine's job. And when it comes to forms and compliance, I can't think of anything that makes me want to stick bicycle spokes in my eyes more than filling out massive Excel spreadsheets or PDFs and questionnaires. And so I just get Codex to do all these things now. And because it has all the context from my company, it's able to fill these out very effectively. And I basically don't have to spend any time doing this anymore. And so with all of these things, you're probably thinking, why are you giving access to your Gmail, your code base, doing all this crazy stuff for you? And the answer is you should always trust but verify. So these agents are extremely good, but as you know, they do make mistakes. But I trust it quite a lot, but I am always the one who, at the end of the day, is making decisions of when to deploy things, when to send things to customers. So yeah, if something's gone wrong, it's my fault. It's not the agent's fault. Some other things that I use it for is building internal automation tooling for my business as well. So these are things like scripts, command line interface tools, Chrome extensions, plugins, and just a bunch of one-off kind of tools to automate something that happens to be needed on the spot. So one small example of this is I've got a little website automation CLI tool. And so I can do things like paste in a YouTube video. I've recorded like hundreds of YouTube videos. And so I just paste that in. It automatically transcribes it, adds it as a new page on my website. And it will do that in about 10 seconds. Years ago, even before ChatGPT, I was doing this all myself and it used to take hours. And so now it's kind of down to 10 seconds. Another really handy thing I've found is spinning up sort of standalone web apps, customer-facing web apps. And I've done this for things like free design resources, like this email component library in the bottom here. Things like PDF quote generators. I used to get emails all the time. People would be on the pricing page and tell me, can you send me a PDF quote of the pricing? And so I'd have this template where I'd have to fill out the price and kind of copy paste the price from the page that they've just linked me to, scroll down to the pricing table, and they just love PDFs. And so I was like, if you love PDFs so much, you can generate your own PDFs now with this tool. So I spent like 30 minutes vibe coding this PDF quote generator, and it's saved me probably like an hour a week in these PDF generations. And yeah, just other things like license management and just making customers' lives a little bit easier or more useful. Another one, which is pretty obvious, is image assets. So because Codex is essentially just GPT models under the hood, it can generate assets in Codex as well. And so I figured that real slop has never been tried. So I decided to ship these Studio Ghibli anime sort of images, mostly with machine guns and M16s in them, to my marketing website. So I've got a skill that can just generate these whenever I like. And so it's also pretty good at website design. So I iterate with Codex in the in-app browser. So Codex has a built-in browser where you can actually drop pins on parts of the page on the real website. And you can leave feedback just like you would with a normal review of a designer's work. And once you've left all the feedback, you just fire off all those comment pins and it will automatically go through and make all the changes, and you can just kind of work on it in that way with it. And obviously I also use it for developing new features and UI in my Figma plugins as well. And I've had a pretty robust design system and component library from kind of day one. but Codex is very smart, and it picks out all of the right components from the global library, and then it just wires up all the functionality. But yeah, I haven't really had any issues with it going rogue. It's pretty good at knowing what components to use, and if it builds its own new components, it'll use my styles, so it uses all the right kind of color variables and stuff like that. Another one that I use it for is marketing and doing things like conversion optimizations. So I've got some marketing skills installed that are quite good, and also the Lazy Web MCP, which is sort of a way that you can have Codex look up other sites or other screenshots of things that might be similar that it can learn from, and then adapt some of those things into your own UI. So it's been pretty good at doing that as well. I should also note that my revenue has gone up quite a bit since I started using these agents. So whatever they're doing seems to be working. And just in general, I think that more ideas are basically worth trying, even if it's like a really small idea and it's kind of dumb like this one. If you can vibe code it in and deploy it in like 30 minutes, maybe it's just worth a try. So this example is just a really small one. I just thought it'd be cool to have a pre-populated, convince your boss type email to buy a product or something like that. So yeah, I just shipped that one ages ago. And finally, I also think Codex can be really helpful for the more higher barrier tasks as well. So kind of on the other extreme, where they're like important tasks that you know you should do and you really want it to do, but you just don't have the time or the skill set to do them. And so I kind of decided to challenge Codex a little bit to say, can we just generate product demo videos? Because I've been wanting to do this for like a year and just never got around to it. So I gave it access to 11 Labs and HeyGen, for the audio and AI avatar. And I basically gave it no other context. I just said, go to my website, take my existing like plain screen caps and just write your own script, edit the videos till they match everything, and just do whatever you want basically. And once I got it working, I could roll it out to all 12 of the plugins in an afternoon. And so this is one example of what it kind of came up with. So you can judge for yourself if it's any good or not. Here we go.
With a simple timeline inside Figma, preview every movement, and build campaign creative much faster without touching code. Export ready to run banners in the formats your media workflow actually needs, including HTML, MP4, GIF, WebM, and more, without rebuilding assets by hand. Bring videos, motion, and richer creative into your banners without wrestling with extra tools, and keep everything inside your Figma file while you work. Share polished browser previews that make reviews simpler, help clients approve faster, and keep the handoff between design and production moving smoothly. Animate banners in Figma, export polished creative for every major ad format, and launch faster with Bannerify.
Anyway, so that's kind of the HTML version. I got it to do that video component as well, where it automatically, does the play button and stuff. I got it to blur the end of that video in the actual rendering process, so it could add the overlay for the clickable CTA, which takes you to the pricing page and stuff like that. So anyway, it's way better than nothing. And if I didn't have AI, I just would have, let this sit there for 2 more years and never got around to it. So it can kind of unblock you in that way. And obviously this can be improved. I think this is HeyGen version 3. They're up to version 5 now, but it's a tiny avatar, so it really doesn't matter that much. But in any case, so this is just some of the many, this talk was like an hour long before, so I cut it in half in terms of examples. But these are some examples of how Codex essentially helps me run my entire business, from customer support, product engineering, documentation, design and creative, marketing, SEO, research and strategy, admin and compliance, and of course, internal tooling and automation. So I would estimate that 90% of the tasks that I used to do are now done by Codex. So that allows me to have more time to work on the business and less time getting stuck in the business. And one way to think about that is, all of these things kind of compound. So even if you think about the bug fixing task, the fact that I don't have to be hung up on a particular bug for hours and kind of diagnose what's going on, and have Codex do that entire process of diagnosing it and fixing it in 2 to 3 minutes, that is a massive gain when you're dealing with many, many threads per week. But having said all of that, even with all this automation, the hard parts are still hard. So it's still hard to get product market fit, sales, marketing, and distribution, notoriously hard. Getting customers and retaining them is hard. deciding what to build and why is very hard. And overall strategy, or how you're going to win, might be the hardest thing of all. But the weird part is I've noticed that I work about 20% more after I started using Codex and these AI agents. And I don't think this is uncommon. I think a lot of developers run into this. And one of the reasons is because I can ship so much more, I ship so much more. And in that way, you can think of Codex as a backlog destroyer. I saw an interesting post in the Agile Reddit subreddit where this guy was like melting down because he's like, I feel like I am a historian documenting things that have already happened. So he's creating these, sprint boards and all these things. And he's like, the developers get the task and 20 minutes later it's deployed. Like, what am I even doing anymore? And so, yeah, it really changes the way that I think a lot of companies are going to have to plan out their work. But the weird part is that it also works the opposite extreme. It kind of works both ways. So I can also work roughly 90% less than before. So technology is miraculous because it does allow us to do more with less. And so one concrete example of this was last year in March, before Claude Code, before I was using these AI coding tools or agentic tools, I was still spending about 3 to 4 hours a day just maintaining the business, kind of on maintenance mode, not taking on any new projects, just doing the day-to-day sort of stuff to make sure the business didn't burn down. If you contrast that with last month, where I spent the month in South Korea, I was spending about 30 to 40 minutes a day doing those same things. And so you can see how the difference is between just 1 year. And this is nothing. Like, this is just going to keep going, and it's just going to keep getting better over time. But for me, at least, the mythical 4-hour work week is actually weirdly now possible. So as I said, I was able to travel around South Korea with the business on maintenance mode, keeping all the customers happy, keeping all the requests, delivered every day. But because I had Codex, I was able to do this, with far less time than I only had to do a year ago. And also I was trying to have a little bit of a break from all this AI stuff. I was just like jacked into X, just like absorbing all this stuff. I'm like, I gotta get away from this like AI stuff for a little while. But Korea is so AI pilled. Everywhere you turn, there's pictures of Dario and Sam Altman everywhere. And so he's everywhere. I couldn't escape. So I picked like the worst place to go to get away from the AI stuff. And in any case, that also kind of leads me to, you can use Codex anywhere, and of course this also applies to Claude. But I can control my computer via the mobile app from anywhere. So last week I was at the movies during the day, and the trailers are like 25 minutes now. And so I was just on my phone, like writing this massive prompt to Codex. And by the time I got home, it was all done. It was like this, 3-hour task, and it had finished by the time I got back. And so, yeah, it's really a wild time to be alive. But as I said earlier, I really want to hammer this home that AI only multiplies your existing foundation systems and values. And so the healthier the foundation is, the stronger that multiplier is going to be. So if you want to stop bullets, you should probably make sure your company's in good shape. And as I promised, I'm going to spend the next few minutes just finishing off talking about Jurassic Park. So I'd really recommend checking out a couple of documentaries. One is called Light and Magic, which is about industrial light and magic, the company behind George Lucas' Star Wars and Jurassic Park and Terminator 2 and all this stuff. And another one called Jurassic Punk. But in any case, the thing that I really resonated with is that at that time, it was really like what we're going through right now, where all of these kind of model makers and animators, stop motion animators, were really talented at what they did. They loved their craft. They did amazing work. But at the same time, in the same studio, these rogue people who worked on Terminator 2 were convinced that they could build dinosaurs in 3D. And nobody wanted to believe it. They're like, that's impossible. And then when they showed it was possible, the other people did everything they could to try and stop it because they didn't want their jobs to be taken. And so you got this weird sort of hybrid of the two. And so the future was just there. You just had to look at the screen. But you really had to want to see it. And a lot of these people chose not to see it. And ironically, were wiped out like the dinosaurs that they were modeling. And so I think today we have something very similar where it feels to me like we're all kind of watching two different movies on the same screen. We all have access to the same facts, but there seems to be vastly different narratives depending on who you talk to. And so in terms of like the AI, anti-AI sort of contradictions, there's this weird sort of Schrodinger's AI where all these contradictory things are true at the same time. So AI is so useless that it should be dismissed, but it's also so powerful that it must be regulated. It's so fake that it clearly must be a bubble, but it's so real that it's going to take everybody's job. It's so dumb that it's basically just an autocomplete that predicts tokens, but it is so smart that it could even end the world. It is so unprofitable that it's obviously a scam, but it's so profitable that it must be seized by the US government. And finally, it is so dangerous that it just must be destroyed at all costs, even if that means nuking the data centers from orbit. It's the only way to be sure. And so one quote that really stood out to me was the guy who came up with responsive web design back in the day. And he wrote this article where the subtitle of the article was, "Artificial intelligence is a failed technology." And it's time we described it that way. So note the date on this. This was September 2025. And I would just correlate this date with a couple of graphs. This arrow is pointing 2 weeks before the number of Claude Code daily commits grew by a factor of 42,000x. It was also posted 2 weeks before the Anthropic revenue run rate went vertical from under $10 billion to $44 billion in 6 months, the fastest growing company in history. So the market is telling you that the value is real, but people ideologically are blinded and captured and don't want it to be true. So with that said, I think that the real bottleneck here is not intelligence at all. It's actually much more human. And as we've heard from the people I talked to before, who are just now getting approved to use Copilot at their company, AI moves far faster than institutions do, and bureaucracy slows down this adoption massively. Regulation, as we've seen in the last couple of weeks with the US government effectively now de facto regulators for every new model, is also going to bottleneck AI. And as you would probably know, individual gains do not automatically become company gains. And it's also a very natural human tendency for status anxiety, just like the Jurassic Park people. They don't want to lose what they've kind of built up, and so they create a massive amount of resistance. And so in this reality, I think that the ultimate advantage actually just becomes initiative. And one concrete example that I'll just end with that I see every week is I get emails from companies making me confirm that my products have absolutely nothing to do with AI, even if I tell them the only feature is a copy prompt to clipboard button that makes it easy for them to copy a prompt to the clipboard. And this isn't good enough. And I ask them, how do you make sure your designers do not manually copy text content from Figma and paste it into ChatGPT? I'm yet to hear a reply back, so I'll let you know. But finally, I think you have a choice to make, just like the Jurassic Park people. Everybody is going to be AI pilled by default. So the question is, which pill do you want to be AI pilled by? You can either take the blue pill and go back to believing that AI is useless or evil, or you can take the red pill, take the leap into the future, and feel the AGI. Because it's very important to not be short-sighted and think that the reality of today is what the reality is going to be like forever. Because by 2030, your workflows will be running on dramatically more capable AI. And so I think you should probably design your company to benefit from more intelligence over time. And so what did we learn? Well, we learned that AI will not fix a broken company. It can only multiply what's already there. We learned that Codex and Claude Code, to my Claude Code fans in the audience, that these tools are not just for code. Everything's computer. So anything you can do on a computer, you will eventually be able to do with these tools. And I would say that workflows are the real asset, because as we know, these models will keep improving. And if you've seen what the new models like Fable can do, you would already be well aware of this. And finally, I would just reiterate that you do not need permission. I don't care what your company says. I don't care if they say you're only allowed to use Copilot. Just use whatever you want to use. Like, they're going to be the ones left behind. So you should just do whatever you want. And if they fire you, you should start a new company or go and work at Kogan. And so you do not need permission. So I would suggest trying to just start small and automate one single workflow tomorrow and just, see how it goes. I think you'll be surprised at what it can do. So my final quote is from Morpheus in The Matrix. And I would just say that you have to let it all go. The fear, the doubt, and the disbelief. Free your mind. So I'll see you on the other side, I hope. Thank you very much.